Hi everybody, I'm Debbie Stine, and today we are talking about community engagement. I've called this series Engage and Empower, and it's to me an extremely important topic, and it's also something that has changed a lot over the sort of decades that I have been working in this world. And from my perspective, that is a good thing. So this is the overview session. I will be doing like more in-depth sessions, focusing on various techniques, interviews, focus groups, and surveys, um, over the course of the summer. And then in the end, have something about communicating this information to policymakers and the public when this analysis is done. So I'm hoping everybody will go to all parts of the series, because even luckily if you're on vacation, there's recordings that are available. I did ask in the chat, and I would still appreciate it when you get a chance, is if you have engaged at all in community engagement, which it looks like a good number of you have. Anything that you have in terms of like any experiences that you can share, what's worked, what challenges you face, those would be good. And of course, just go ahead and put in questions as you go along. Most of the time, I think in this case, the questions will be at the end. But I do want to make sure that I address different things that occurred. Now, one comment I already saw was about AI. Now, most of the time I include an awful lot on AI and about how you can use it for these activities. I will for the next three, the interviews, focus group, and surveys. And I will talk a little bit about it as I kind of go along. But I'm one of these people who are a believer in AI. And I did actually something called AI Prompts Unleashed about a month ago, I think, um, about it. Now, of course, you have to use it carefully, but I think in this very much economically constrained world, AI can be a really good, real big help to people if you use it properly. It definitely is something that's on the change. So today we're going to talk about basically what community engagement is, why it's important, the different types, and the steps, how you assess the success of your community engagement, and talking about some of the core values and ethical considerations that you need to think about. So first, what is community engagement? Okay, so this one is Carl, and he's preparing for his next presentation to the stakeholders. And he is not doing what I would call as good community engagement. Not only is he hiding from the community, but this is also not what community engagement is about, standing at a podium. And I totally understand this because my first 5 years after engineering school, I was a field engineer, and I participated in many community events from people who were quite concerned about the air pollution from the plants that were basically across the road from them. So I was definitely one of those people. But now today I know I should not be one of those people. So this is more what community engagement is. It should be lots of interaction, lots of dialogue where people are engaged, where there's communication and partnerships and education. And the education is just not one-sided, where you are like, educating the public, and then they're like learning, from you, but also you are learning from the public. And to me, that's the most important thing. I do a lot of work with focus groups. That's probably my favorite method of doing this kind of work. And for example, I do work in with West Virginia University faculty, with West Virginia stakeholders, and I tell them what I want you to be is quiet. I want you to listen and not talk. And as you might imagine, for faculty members, that can be challenging, but they do a great job, and they are always amazed with how much they learn through these engagements with the public. So it's very much of a listening exercise, not a talking exercise. So this is a more formal definition. This is from the CDC. Community engagement is the process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people connected by geographic proximity, special interest, or similar situations. So I'd like to emphasize that lots of times when we think about community engagements, we're thinking about community as in like a town or a subset of a town or a neighborhood, very much from a geographic perspective. But community can also mean many other things, like if you're really maybe the focus is on kids, and so your community is parents and throughout your school district. That's a community. If it might be people who are say of a particular gender or sexual orientation or things of that nature, okay, that is also community. So community is something which is self-defined, people who have similar interests, not just things that are geographic proximity. So another thing I think is important to understand is the difference between community engagement and stakeholder engagement. Like a lot of the times when I do presentations for Innovate US, I really focus primarily on stakeholder engagement. And that is like when you have sort of say a policy or challenge, some societal challenge that you're trying to figure out what action to take. The one I'm working on right now is on like AI data centers, right? So in this case, and their placement in communities. So when I'm doing stakeholder engagement, what I'm doing is I'm talking to AI experts. I'm talking to people who are from the AI business community, people who regulate AI or regulate environmental issues. I'm talking about all sorts of different people that are part, and part of that stakeholder is a community where these AI data centers might be placed, right? But that's not the same thing when I'm talking to this broader audience. Now, in the case of West Virginia, again, and I'm focusing on that because that's what I'm working on right now, is that there's communities in West Virginia. We know that like there's a really big push in West Virginia to have these AI data centers, which is understandable because they need the jobs. Even though the jobs are not that great, they have to kind of balance that. The communities have to balance that with, okay, well, this is going to take some of our energy, some of our water resources. And do we, as a community, as a geographic entity, want to have a data center in this particular location? Like what I'm focusing on is former mine lands, right? So it's sort of like, it's very much a cost benefit analysis for those people in the community, the residents of it. And when I talk to them, which I'm actually not doing in this case. In this case, I'm just preparing background materials for them. But what I am doing is I'm looking at them to see what it is that they think, right? So if I was the organization who's looking at putting this AI data center in this West Virginia community, I would definitely be involved with community engagement. And what I want it to be is I want it to be where I am not talking to them, hey, AI data centers are a wonderful thing, right? I want to listen to their concerns. I want to work with them. I want to negotiate with them so that they can make a good decision as to whether or not that AI data center is in their community or not in their community. It's not to my benefit as a person who wants to build the AI data center to be in a community that does not want me. It's better for me to go to the community next door. And I've done lots of analysis for this, not just on this, but things like carbon dioxide reduction facilities, like direct air capture, things like that. I've done that like all over the country and looked at community events, how you reach community agreements about whether or not something should or should not be in a community and sort of negotiating what that might be. So I think it's important to distinguish between the two when you have community engagement and stakeholder engagement. You also have other things out there, other terms out there like civic engagement and things like that. So it's really important that you understand what it is you're doing. Now, it doesn't mean, by the way, that as I do community engagement, I don't also do stakeholder engagement, right? Because I will often do that because one way to reach the community is through, say, community groups, like maybe it might be, say, the Chamber of Commerce or something, or it might be a church or some sort of religious community that's in there. So I might still be working with the stakeholders to reach the communities, but community engagement itself is a kind of a separate kind of activity. So why is it important? Okay, so this is what can happen if you do not have community engagement. You can have mistrust and miscommunication. There can be confusion. There can be skepticism. You can have poor decision making with underutilized resources, limited project outcomes, social fragmentation, because the community might be split on whatever it is that you're looking at. And you can have insufficient resource use. So I think that's part of the reason why community engagement has become so much more part of our world today than it was, say, 10 years ago. But with community engagement, you can improve your decision making because you can really hear what the concerns are, the cultural issues are. There's undoubtedly some like old fogey who says, oh, well, you can't put that data center there because, there was a big flood in 20 in 20 and this and such happened. So you can learn from them. That will help you improve your decision making. There can be resource sharing. There might be data or information that the community has that you don't have. It can strengthen the network among your community members so they get to know each other and hopefully trust each other. That's particularly important if they disagree with one another, that they at least respect each other's views. So in case you don't know, there's something called the International Association for Public Participation. This is very much an international issue. It's done all over the world. And this is their quality assurance standard, which is governments and industry across the globe are increasingly recognizing the value of community and stakeholder engagement as an essential part of significant project planning and decision-making. The paradigm of decision-making consideration has shifted from a culture of announce and defend to one of debate and decide. And that goes back to what I was talking about with this West Virginia community and data centers. It's expected that engagement practices will identify, understand, and respond to the interests, risks, and interdependence of all project stakeholders, as well as address legislative and public policy requirements for engagement. So in the Biden administration, we actually had a number of initiatives for community engagement. A lot of those are going by the wayside in the Trump administration. But on a global basis, there are definitely laws out there. One of the ones I'm going to talk to you about later is in Scotland, which is where some of the most interesting work is going on, in my opinion, that actually set standards and put community engagement into law. So what are the different types of community engagement? So this is one of the most important decisions that you need to make with your leadership is where will you be along this spectrum of community engagement? So one is you just inform, you just provide a balanced, objective information. That's kind of what I'm doing now on data centers on former mine lands. I am producing what's called a science technology note, a single two-sided page that provides all the information. I'm not making any recommendations. I'm just saying, okay, here's the pros, here's the cons, here's what you should know. That's like the lowest level, right? Because I'm not having any direct community interaction. I am looking at what questions the public is asking as a researcher, as an analyst, but I'm not like talking to the members of the public because that is not what the organization I'm working for wants me to do, right? Then you can go up the spectrum. Consulting, you get some input and feedback and ideas. That's often what I'm doing with focus groups. And that's, again, probably the most common thing. And the reason why is because you want that consultation, but it can be expensive, right? And so we talk about people resources, financial resources. The higher you go in the spectrum, the more difficult it is, the more it's going to cost you in terms of people time and financial resources. The next stage is to involve the public, right? So this might be something where you actually have some sort of substantive group session, like maybe a workshop or some sort of meeting with the public, where it's sort of a lot of like kind of going back and forth. The next stage up is collaborating, where you really are partnering with them, right? So in that case, when I've done those kinds of things, I'm more the facilitator, right? So all the parties are there and I'm bringing them together and, trying to get them to prioritize what's going on. And then the highest level is empower. And that is when the final decision is not made by, like the leaders, so to speak, of the community per se. In other words, like the mayor or something. It is actually made by the public. They vote on whatever it is. I'm based in Pittsburgh, in my small community. I get a survey every once in a while where they actually ask me, should we, this is literally the question we had, should we spend money on a new swimming pool for the high school or should we build sidewalks? And people voted on what we should have. Okay. And it was empowering the people and it was basically a straight vote. Now, people, of course, campaign, like the swimming pool moms and so forth, they said, hey, vote for the swimming pool, but the people who are the walkers in our town, because not every place has it. And in Pittsburgh, that's a big deal because we have ice and snow and all sorts of things, and we have and some of our roads are kind of rough. There's lots of hills. It was a big deal. So, but the people are empowered, and they send out the survey every once in a while, and we vote on directly on how our tax dollars are being used. So, when you, as a staff member, are doing this, it's good to kind of ask whoever your leadership is to say, okay, where do you want me to be on the spectrum of public engagement? Is it just where we're going to inform and just talk to a few people, or are we really going to go full blast, conduct surveys that are scientifically valid surveys, which is a lot harder than one where we just kind of do random surveys and sort of see what people say. Sorry. Okay, so here again, this is the same sort of spectrum, but what I want to focus on is the bottom half, which is what the promise you're making to the public is when you engage at these different levels. So at the lowest level, it's just saying, okay, we're going to keep you informed. When you're consulting, like doing focus groups and things like that, we're going to keep you informed and listen to you, acknowledge your concerns and aspirations, and we're going to get back to you and say, okay, well, this is how public input influenced the final decision. If it's the involved, what you're telling the public is that we're going to ensure your concerns and aspirations are directly reflected in the alternatives developed and provide feedback on how it influenced our decision. If you're collaborating, we're going to look to you for advice and innovation, and formulating the solutions, kind of the brainstorming. We're going to incorporate your advice and recommendations, and that will influence our decision to the maximum extent possible. And on the last one, we'll implement whatever it is you decide. So it's important that the public knows when you're doing this kind of engagement, what it is that you are promising them, so that the rules are very clear up front what it is. And it's because you do not want them to have false expectations. So this again is the sort of the same chart here, but it's kind of giving you more information on methods that you can do to do different things. So you'll see here, like at the lowest level here, you have open houses, you have social media, you might have like going up further up information sessions, newsletters, websites. Then when you're consulting, you have listening sessions, surveys, focus groups, public meetings. Then you get into community conversations, participatory decision-making, citizen advisory groups, and at the end, you have delegated leadership, participatory budgeting, citizen juries. So this also is, I think, good as you're in that planning stage to figure out, okay, well, like where are we along this spectrum? Because again, it's all a matter of resources that we have. So here we're going to, this is a chart with sort of the 9 steps. This is actually developed by the American Hospital Association for Public Health, and the example I'm going to give you is from public health. But I like this. Out of all the different models that are out there, I think this one is the one that makes the most sense to me. The first is kind of reflecting and strategizing. And that's what I sort of talked about at the beginning of the process, is that, you just don't want to go and say, hey, we're going to engage the community without really thinking about what it is you want to do. Like, how much do you want to spend in terms of resources, in terms of time? And do you have the expertise? Maybe you'd love to do a survey, but, maybe your in-house expertise isn't enough to do a statistically significant survey. Maybe you can do a survey, but you're going to have to acknowledge that you're not necessarily going to collect enough data, for that reason, but you're just going to collect it for more informational purposes. You also want to kind of see what information you already have now. Maybe you've had community meetings in the past, other kinds of things where there's been letters, public sessions, whatever. But that's the first thing, is you want to kind of reflect and figure out what it is you're going to do. The next part is to engage the stakeholders. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, where you might want to then start talking to community leaders in your nonprofits, in business and industry, whatever it is that's relevant to your topic, interest groups, and say, here's what we're planning to do. What do you think? And again, this is good as a listening exercise. You're not telling them, you're telling them that this is a draft. This is a draft plan, and we'd like your input. What do you think? And it's really important that you do that, whatever it is that you plan to do. Next stage is defining your community. That's also very important, because you want to make sure no one is left behind. Now, on these two steps, this is where AI can help you a great deal. And that, and I've done this exercise a number of times with lots of groups, including, like people who are active analysts like myself. And every time I say, okay, here, what I want you to do is like use this prompt to identify your stakeholders, identify your community. And I ask them to predict ahead of time who it will be. And they always say, I missed somebody. And so to me, this is really where AI can help you, because you can make sure that you don't miss somebody. Because the worst thing to do is to have a big meeting, and then somebody else at the table, one of the other group, is going to say, hey, why isn't so-and-so here? And then you say, oh, I missed them. And it is like so embarrassing. Okay, so then you're implementing your plan, you're collecting and analyzing your data, whatever method you're going to use. Based on that data, you clarify the community priorities, you document the results, and you communicate it back to the stakeholders and to the community members. You plan your implementation strategy, then you implement it, and then you evaluate progress. Ideally, you will come back to all these people after the program has been in place for, I don't know, say 6 months or something, and say, hey, this is what we did, this is what happened. Any thoughts? And then you would make adjustments. And that aspect is where we get into program evaluation. And I did a whole series of that. I think it was maybe last fall, if anybody's interested in program evaluation. So here's the same list again, and it's applied to a community health issue. So like, again, in this reflect and strategize stage, you're looking at these past community health assessments, identifying what worked, areas for improvement, and whether whatever it is you're doing now had the intended impact. Then you identify engaged stakeholders, you establish trust with the community groups, give them joint ownership of the process. Maybe oftentimes they'll form an advisory committee of some kind of the people who are the stakeholder group. Next, use some geographic population data, whatever it is that makes sense, to define what is meant by community. Make sure that your stakeholder group agrees with how you define community. You then do some sort of data collection. It could be quantitative, qualitative, anything to sort of collect opinions, to set priorities. That's to me is the most important part. Is whenever I do focus groups and things like that, I always make sure they prioritize, which is like the next step here, not just say what it is that they want. You document, communicate the results, so you share it with both your internal and external audiences. And then going over here to step 7, you then look at how to implementation strategies. This is like, given all that you have learned, what is it you should do to implement the policy. Now this gets into implement the different policy options that are proposed. Okay, so in this case, this is where you get into policy analysis, which again is another workshop that I've done in the past. So you have like 2 or 3 ways you can address this, and then what you want to do is you want to evaluate that using these 4 E's, which is effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and ease of political acceptability. once you do that analysis, depending on the degree of community involvement you have, then you might go back to your focus groups. I mean, go back to your community or go back to your stakeholders or your advisor committee to get feedback on that. Get there, okay, they implement the strategies, and then you evaluate the progress that you have made. So this is sort of the same thing. It's just kind of a little bit more simpler. Like if 9 steps is too much, I thought, well, I'd go ahead and keep this one, which is more of a 5-step process. But basically, it's plan, engage, analyze, get feedback, and implement. And again, so this is going back to this spectrum of different methods that you can use. This is a version by somebody else, but I liked it, so I kind of added it in. So you see here for things like inform, techniques you might use is like something simple like a website, print digital media, open house or training sessions. As you get further up, you have polls and surveys, open mic sessions, walking tours, sometimes like for community things that might be an option. Let's just say that somebody wants to be an AI data center. Well, maybe you go and there's one in the next county. And so you bring a bus of people there and say, well, here's what a data center looks like. Stakeholder interviews, sometimes a facilitated meeting, either online. I don't know why it says poorly facilitated community meeting. And then you go to, I guess what they're saying is a poorly facilitated community meeting would be at this lower level. And then over here is a well-facilitated community meeting that would be over here. Then you have some sort of workshop you might have. If the community is really involved, then you like have them go through that 4E analysis I mentioned earlier to really actually do the work and do the pros and cons for those 4Es. And then finally, you have some sort of training and support. So maybe like the facilitator, sometimes you would bring in somebody like me who's kind of like more of a neutral person, but sometimes it might be better to have a community leader do it because that's who the community will have the greater trust in. So when you're looking at all these different methods, like I said, we're going to go through a good number of these in the follow-up workshops. You want to think about issues like your available human and financial resources, not just the number of people you have, but the skills of the people that you have. How fast is the analysis needed? Is this something where, a decision has to be made in the next month, or can it be made over the next year? The stakeholder acceptance is also a big factor of this, both of the data sources and whatever method you're using. You might at the same time collect quantitative data at the same time as you're doing qualitative data, and privacy might be an issue as well. So some people may or may not be willing to respond. So this is the best case study that I came across, just kind of like by accident. I was in Denver for a big event, and I was reaching out for somebody who had done equity analysis, and I found this very interesting work that was done, and it's still being done, I think, by the city of Denver. So it's sort of like my model program, but I'm always looking for model programs, and so that's why earlier I asked if anybody has, any good examples of community engagement that they can share and document. I can use it in some future presentation. But in case you don't know, Denver has had a good number of equity issues in the past. The one that was a focus of the presentation I was working on was parks, so that just in the way Denver was designed, and it was like actually part of the law, that like state law in the state of Colorado, is that the nice parks with green areas and space and things like that went in the white areas of town. And in the black areas of town, they had like blacktop parks, like a basketball court, and that was like about it. And so they're now trying to go back and, as they make investments, correct those challenges. So what they did is, and maybe if there's somebody in the city of Denver here, they might express their own opinion on this thing, but they have this big giant document, this blueprint Denver, and you'll see they have this introduction about why now, the community plan, how to do it. They have these vision elements, which I'll talk about next. They have plans, goals, policy strategies, and then they have this equitable planning where they really did all sorts of what I think are pretty, like unique events to try to get community engagement. So these are all the different elements that are part of their vision, which is like affordable inclusivity, um, having strong, authentic neighborhoods, connected, safe, and accessible places, economically diverse areas, environmentally resilient. That's a big issue, by the way, with these parks because of climate change in terms of the degree to which people are affected, and then healthy and active areas. So I went on their webpage to see like what's happening, and it's because it was a couple years ago that I was at this event, and it is still there. They have this whole community engagement page, and they just on this thing here, which is the Southwest Area Plan, they have developed. So they're basically asking for input on their draft plan. Back when I did this a couple of years ago, they had this strategy, which you can just find on their webpage. It's all public information, where they have this engagement strategy as to how they're going to engage community members. They have these big giant spreadsheets, by the way, where they track everything, like how well they are in terms of reaching their goals and so forth. But you'll see here building trust between the participants, including historically marginalized, underserved, and hard to reach communities, educating participants and so forth. Then part of what they did is they identified the different groups that were relevant for, like this place is something called the Near Northwest. I presume that's part of Denver. And what I really like about this is all the different things that they did to try to engage people. So most of the time, like when you see community engagements, it's like kind of the stuff that I do, which is like focus groups and surveys and things like that. But, and they do have that. They have like community workshops where they have something like the plan van that they sent out to the community. They have a street team. Uh, they have this intercept events, so where they go and they interact with people. They even have a game called Growing a Better Denver Game. They have a community task force, which is a pretty common thing. That's kind of like the same thing as advisor committee. And they also have online engagement. But they also have these engagement kiosks where I guess, I don't know, I presume they put that in the local malls or something or wherever people are at to do it. And I just liked it because they used everything I could possibly think of to try to engage the public. So it's not just the usual suspects, the people who have the most time to engage, but really go to where the people are. And then they have these sort of community themes, and then they do report back as to what it is that they heard. So it's not just like lots of times, sometimes there'll be community engagement, but the people who participated never hear what happened. And this can be very irritating. And also it means that they're less likely to participate in the future. So how can you assess the success of your community engagement? Luckily, the Institute for Local Government has a whole set of worksheets that you can do. They are available like online for free. I just did some screenshots of these just so you could sort of see what they were like. And this is the full assessment. This is just like me to give you examples. So their first set are participants, and you'll see the first one here is a quantitative analysis. But they also have a qualitative analysis. And I would say I always learn much more from the qualitative analysis than I do the quantitative analysis. And it's because I can like use the stories and the information I hear there to illustrate the points that might come up in the quantitative analysis. Then anybody who was like a sponsor or convener, I view these kind of as stakeholders. They are getting some of these same questions as well. But also asking, like I like these things about like what individual statements and subsection categories are rated high or low. Then there's the process improvements where they're going and saying, okay, well, there's a difference between the content of what's being said and the process of the community engagement. And so that's what they're trying to get across here. So the last section here is looking at the core values and ethical considerations in community engagement. And again, I'm going to this International Association for Public Participation. And interestingly, they have chapters, like in a good portion of the United States. And there's lots of really good information on their website. So I encourage you to do that and also get on the email list. Like I'm on the email list and I get all sorts of interesting stuff. And this is their core values. And I think this is also kind of good when you're like discussing with management, things like that, to go over that, to say, okay, do you agree with these core values? Like it's based on the belief that those who are affected by a decision have a right to be involved. It includes the promise that the public's contribution will influence a decision. And it promotes sustainable decisions by recognizing and communicating the needs and interests of all participants. That it seeks out and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected or interested in the decision. Seeking input from participants in designing how they participate. And it provides participants with information that they need to participate in a meaningful way. And then it communicates to participants how their input is reflected in the decision. So this is sort of their standard process for community and stakeholder engagement. I provide this here. I think the simpler ones are maybe a little bit easier, but this is a more like kind of formal process. And then you have the code of ethics here. And basically talking about the most important thing here is that the role of the practitioner, which is people like yourselves, I imagine. We will enhance the public's participation in the decision-making process and assist decision makers in being responsive to the public's concerns and suggestions. We'll take actions that will build trust and credibility, accurately portray the public's role in the decision-making process, be open to dialogue, make sure that the stakeholders have fair and equal access to the process. We don't avoid strategies that would risk polarizing the community, advocate for the public participation process, and ensure all commitments made to the public actually occur, and then basically support the practice by mentoring new practitioners. So this is from the Scottish Community Development Centre, which again, as I mentioned before, there's an actual law in Scotland that does this, that says what this is going to be. Community engagement is a way to build and sustain relationships. It will mean that everyone involved can understand and act together to achieve positive change. And then in Scotland, this is guided by a national standards for community engagement organization. And then this is actually their national standards, which are very similar, but I just thought I'd mention them again in terms of the methods, communication, inclusion, support, planning, and working together. So that is the end, which I'm actually on time for a change, which is actually quite nice. This is a little bit about me. I work in science and technology policy, as you might guess from the name of my organization, the Science Technology Policy Academy. I do produce a number of newsletters and things on LinkedIn. I encourage you to connect with me because I do other free workshops and things that are out there. In fact, I'm starting one next week, actually, which is going to give an overview of my book, which is on policy analysis. So to do that, just connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can sign up for that workshop. I also post policy job openings, about 100 each week, because I'm trying to help all these people who are now unemployed. I also have an opinion newsletter called Inform and Influence. And that is it. So I am ready for questions.